Hello everyone. So today we'll be talking about chapter 6, which is files and exceptions. So the topics that we are going to cover in this chapter are introduction to file input and output, using loops to process files, processing records, and finally exceptions. So I will be uploading individual files for each of these topics, as I did for chapter 5 and chapters before that. Okay. So the first topic is introduction to file input and output. So for a program to run or for a computer to perform any task, you must first save the data, right? Like let's say you are opening a Word document and you're writing something. So if you just close it without saving the data, there is a saving the file, then there is a good chance of losing the data. We all know that. So basically, when the data is particularly saved into a file, then in most of the cases, it is saved on a computer disk. Like that is where the memory is. So that is where the data or the file that you have saved will be present. So if you want to retrieve the data and if you want to use that data for later for any other purpose, you can always go to that folder and also open that file. So the type of the words writing data to, meaning that you are saving data onto the file. An output file is a file that is used to retrieve the written data. So whenever I say like that you are writing some data into the file, that means you are basically saving data onto a file. So here, when you're talking about the writing data into a file, you have, like, let's say we have three variables here. That is pay rate, employee ID, and employee name. These are the variables and they can have any values, as variables can hold any type of data. So you have some floating point, some mix of both arithmetic and integers or numbers, and then you have a string that is the name of the employee. So you are basically writing that into a file, and that file is saved onto the computer disk. So that is the reason why it is shown here. So you have the data, and that is a file, and this represents the disk, which is on the random access memory on your computer. So now when you are retrieving the data, the process is otherwise called as reading data from. So basically writing data to a file and reading data from the file. So input file is a file from which the data is read. So this type of terminology, like, the output file and input file are important when you want to understand the terminology in the programs. So when I say like, and also the variable names that I'm going to use throughout this chapter will be depending upon the task that I'm doing, task that I'm performing. So let's say that I'm trying to read a particular data from a file that is already existing in the computer. Then in that case, the variable that I'll be creating is in file, that is input file. So in file. So when I'm writing a particular data onto a file, or if I'm creating a new file and I'm writing the data onto the file, then I will be creating a variable out file. So like, when we are discussing the lab, it will be much more clear. So when a program is using a file, it has typically three steps. One is to open the file, second is to process the file, and third is to close the file. So if you are not, closing the file, then there is a good chance of losing the data. So even when you're writing the programs, these three steps must be followed. And opening the file has its own syntax. We'll see that in the next slides. Processing the file is basically when you are trying to read the data, write the data, or append the data. So we'll see what that means in the next slide as well. And closing the file also has its own syntax. So this is a demonstration of getting the data from or reading the data from a particular file which is already on the disk. So that is the reason why you have the arrows pointing outwards. So when you are talking about types of files and file access, in general, we do have two types of files, that is text file and binary file. In this chapter, we'll be focusing on text files. So basically text files, that is a file that has contents which have been encoded in the format of a text. Binary file contains the raw file which has not been converted into a text. So binary file, as the name suggests, as it's binary, so it will be with all zeros and ones. So this is basically for the computer to understand what type of data that it is dealing with. And we also have two types of data access. We have sequential access and we have direct access. So sequential access is like basically reading from one part to, like, if you basically reading from point A to point Z. So you cannot skip to point F or point H in between. If you want to move to point H, you will have to start from point A. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with cassettes. So in the very, like, olden days, so when they were cassettes, then if you want to listen to something, if you want to play something, or if you want to listen to a track on your cassette, then you'll have to start from the first, and then you'll have to wait till the achieved or till the desired song has been played. So there is no skipping, or there is no dragging and dropping, like, there is none of that stuff. And direct access is the opposite of the sequential access. So it will basically allow you to jump to a particular piece of data that you want to access. So that is like YouTube streaming. So now that you're watching YouTube videos, if you want to skip the first 2-3 parts, and if you just want to listen to the 4th minute, you can directly drag the timeline. That is an example of direct access. And in the programming that we are going to talk here, we'll be using sequential access. So we'll be using text files, and we'll be using sequential access. The next topic will be file names and file objects. So this is, I'll say this is very important to understand. So for the file names and its extensions, so every file that you save on your computer has some extension to it. Like a Word document will have .doc or .docx, like basically the short sequences of characters after the dot, which appear towards the end of your file name, are called as your file name extensions. Like, for example, a PowerPoint will have .ppt, a PDF document will have .pdf. So an image will have .jpeg or .png, .jpeg 2000. It could be anything. It's basically the sequence of characters towards the end of the file name represent the type of the file that it is. So if you are looking at .txt, you are understanding that it's like a notepad which has been saved, which has been converted into a text file. If you are looking at a .doc, you understand that it's a Word file which may have some information. So file object is an object that is associated with the specific file. So like example, as I've said, in file and out file are the two variables that I'm going to use, which also act like file objects. So basically, if you are trying to open a file, then the variable that you have used to open that file will be your file object. Same thing, if you are trying to close the file, or if you are trying to write the contents to a file, the variable that you are using to create a new file will be your file object. So we'll see more about that when you're working on your lab as well. It just becomes a lot more easier once we start the implementations. And file names and file objects, you have variable name and the file object, which is the variable name in this case, is pointing towards Cindy and the other factors associated with that variable name. So that is a representation of a file object. Now, when you're trying to open a function, open a file, there is a particular syntax that you are going to use. And as the name suggests, when you're opening a file, the function that you'll be using is open. So the format is file object, or the variable that is associated in opening this file, is equal to open parenthesis, file name, comma, the mode in which you want to open this file. So there are 3 types of mode in which you can open a file. We have write, that is W. We have read, that is R. That is basically read only. You cannot edit or you cannot make any changes to a file which has been opened in read mode. And then you have appending, that is, or append, that is A. We'll see each and every modes in the next slide. So basically, from the name itself, R is reading only. So if in a program that you're only trying to read the contents from a file, then the best way to do that is by opening the file in the read mode. If you are trying to add some new contents to the existing file without deleting the existing files from a file, then in that case, the best mode to use will be A, that is append. And when you are using the append mode, the new contents that you are writing to the file, which already has some previous contents, will be added towards the end of the existing file. This concept of appending remains the same for lists as well. So try to understand when I'm trying to tell you, like what I'm trying to tell you. So let's say that you are trying to open a file and then add new contents to the file that is already existing on your computer. So this already existing file may have some contents written inside it, and you don't want to delete those contents, but you just want to update those contents. In such cases, you will be using the mode A, that is append, and all the new characters or the new contents that you have added will be added towards the end of the file. And when you are talking about the write mode, that is when you are trying to create a new file, then you will be opening the file, then you can be opening the file in the write mode as well. So when you are trying to open the file in a write mode, and let's say the file is already existing on your computer, all the contents from the existent file will be deleted and the new contents will be replacing the old contents. So if you do not want to lose the data, then you will be using A, that is append mode. If you do not mind losing the data which is already on the existing file, then you can just use the write mode. The descriptions of the three modes are as here. So this is the syntax for read mode itself. So you have customer file is equal to open, customers.txt and R. And customer file is the file object that is associated with the file customers.txt. And notice this, when you are opening a file in the read mode, you have to make sure that that file is already existent on your computer. If the file, like let's say here customers.txt is not present in my computer, in that case, I will be getting an error that says file not found. It's straightforward. It's file not found error. So that's the reason why you have to make sure that you have the customers.txt on your computer when you're trying to open that in the read mode. And when you are, like, let's look at this second example, that is sales file is equal to open sales.txt, comma W. That is basically you are trying to open a file that is sales.txt and you are opening that in the write mode. So basically you are creating a new file, or if the sales.txt is already existing on your computer, if it is existing on your computer and if it has some existing data in it, the data will be erased and whatever the new data that you are trying to write on that file will be present. So the sales file and the customer file are the file objects which are associated with sales.txt and customers.txt respectively. Now, when you are trying to specify the location of the file, you do not have to assume, or you do not have to set the path to save the file. So once you have written the data to it, once you have closed the file in your program, whatever the file that you have created will be in the same location as your program. So let's say I'm in my desktop lab for chapter 6, lab 5, chapter 6, and I'm writing my first program there. By the time I execute the program and I close this .py file, I will see a .txt file in the same folder or in the same directory. And if you want to create, if you want to set the path for your file, then you can always use this syntax. That is test file is equal to open. R stands for raw. So R is the string that is basically raw string. And then that is to consider as whatever is after the R is considered as is. So it is not trying to convert that into anything. So R, and then the path that where you want to save the file, and then the mode. But most of the programs in this chapter will be just directly using the path that is already being used for our program. There is a .py file, so we don't usually set the path. Okay, now let's talk about writing data into a file. So this is basically when you are, let's say, writing anything to a particular file, then the format that you will be using is the write. So here you will be using the write method to write a data into the file. And we have already seen this in the past. So method is basically nothing but a function that belongs to an object. So like here, let's say this. You have your file object that is a file variable dot write and string. So that is from the previous file, customer file dot write shall space. So the file object dot write whatever that you're trying to write. So once this statement is executed, your customers.txt will have Charles Pace as one of its data. That, and you can always write it as name is equal to and then customer file dot write name, that is file object dot write name. And once you have written the data and once you are done writing the data and once you have completed the process of the data of the file, then you must save, you must close the file. Same thing, file closing the file as well. You'll be using the file object dot close. So close is the method that you'll be using. So file object dot close. So let's see an example here. So you have this program writes 3 lines of data. So you are basically defining the main function. So basically, as we have already completed chapter 5, I want you to write all the programs by using functions. So even if you can write the program without using the function, don't do that. Write the programs using functions. So here you have define main, and inside the main function, as you are trying to write the contents into the file, and after this program is executed, you will be looking at an output file in your directory. That's the reason why I have the file object as out file is equal to open philosophers.txt and then in the mode that is W. So now I'm trying to write 3 different names into my file that is philosophers.txt. So that's the reason why I'm using my file object that is out file dot write method, write whatever name that I want to write. Outfile dot write, outfile dot write. And notice this, I have also included \n. So if I do not include the \n, all the contents that I'm writing into the file will be in one single line instead of 3 lines. I want the data to be displayed in 3 different lines. This is very important when you are working with files to understand that the write mode will not attach \n automatically. So you will have to write \n when you are using the write method. So this is the first content. \n is basically new line. You must already know this, know that by this point. And then you are writing the next statement, that is outfile.write David \n, outfile.write Edmund \n, and then outfile.close. When you call the main function, this function will be executing. So when the output, even the output that you will see in your file is John, next line David, next line Edmund. So that is how you write the data into a file. In the next video, we'll be talking about reading data from a file.